He mu na moi inu na moi moi ana puno hono na hao mea he mu oia. He mu, eli, noa, ia e, noa kohonua. He mu oia. He mu na moi inu na moi moi ana puno hono na hao mea he mu oia. He mu, eli, noa, ia e, noa kohonua. He mu oia. He mu na moi inu na moi moi ana puno hono na hao mea he mu oia. He mu, eli, noa, ia e, noa kohonua. O nauna I ka halame ka lehua. E hale lehua no ia naka no e. O ka uno ia e ano ia ne ali ane. Ho io taiti mai. Ho I mai oko. E hiki a me ku aloha no. Aloha e, aloha e, aloha e.
Mahalo Lili Noi Kawahi Kaua for your oli and opening the space we've convened today. Lili Noi has a MSW, uses she, her, oia pronouns, and is from Pi'ihonua Hilo on Mokuo Keawe, but has lived and grown in many other spaces throughout her journey, including Oahu, California, and Arizona. She is a 2021 graduate of Masters of Social Work program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and now serves as a population health specialist with Papaola Lokahi, focusing on addictions, behavioral mental health, and social issues. Her research focuses include data desegregation and indigenous approaches to behavioral mental health, reentry services, incarceration, and substance abuse. She also received her BA in the Administration of Justice with a minor in Hawaiian Studies from the University of Hawaii at Hilo, along with a certificate in Hawaii Lifestyles from Hawaii Community College. Mahalo nui, Lili Noi. Aloha mai kākou. On behalf of ACLU of Hawaiʻi and ʻEkolu Mea Nui and our partners, I welcome our panelists and the audience to our Hawaii Justice Gubernatorial Candidate Forum. My name is Kanakolu Noa, and I am serving as the co-moderator and representing ʻEkolu Mea Nui, a nonprofit organization dedicated to transforming Hawaii's criminal justice system through a Native Hawaiian framework and implementation of Native Hawaiian practices throughout the continuum. Prevention, intervention, and reintegration. ʻEkolu Mea Nui envisions a pono justice system in Hawaii that heals and empowers individuals, ohana, and communities.
Aloha, my name is Carrie Ann Shirota, and I'm the Policy Director for the ACLU of Hawaiʻi. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the civil rights and civil liberties enshrined in our federal and state constitutions. Our current work, legal, field, and policy, is centered on our campaigns focusing on decriminalizing poverty, reimagining public safety, and smart justice. As a reminder, the ACLU, again, is a nonpartisan organization, and we do not support or endorse any particular candidate. The purpose of this forum today is to promote public education on candidates' views so that our community members make informed decisions on matters that are most important to themselves and their ohana, keeping in mind that what we do today affects future generations. The questions posed today were generated from our co-sponsoring organizations. These questions reflect a collective vision for a Hawaii justice system grounded in a public health and restorative justice lens, where we address the root causes of crime and where people are treated humanely even when they have caused harm, and where accountability is therapeutic and restorative, not punitive.
We are at a time of tremendous change. We all know and experience constant change. But this tremendous change, Native Hawaiians have a term for, is hulihia. Hulihia is defined as a complete change, to turn upside down. In this generation, hulihia is more relevant than ever before as we navigate through the issues of civil and human rights, systemic racism, poverty, houselessness, and limited economic opportunities in our home, Hawaii. There's been a crisis of leadership when it comes to addressing the root causes of crime in Hawaii, mass incarceration, and providing meaningful opportunities for rehabilitation and transformation. We know that the next governor will have great influence and power to chart a new course for justice in Hawaii. Working in partnership with our communities, collectively we call upon the next governor to be a part of the hulihia necessary to build healthy, safe, thriving, and just communities for all.
At this time, we would like to thank all of our sponsors who have helped to make this candidate forum possible. Seeds of Peace, Faith Action, Going Home Hawaii Consortium, Hawaii Appleseed for Law and Economic Justice, Hawaii Friends of Restorative Justice, Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center, Hawaii Innocence Project, Hawaii NAACP, HPC Task Force, Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, Men of Pa'a, Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, Our Hawaii Action, and Pono Hawaii Initiative.
We would also like to acknowledge the staff and community volunteers from the nonprofit organization ʻŌlelo Community Media. Mahalo. They are present in the room and will be recording the program, which will air at a later date on ʻŌlelo's channels. ʻŌlelo is doing this as a community service. ʻŌlelo's mission is to strengthen island voices and advance community engagement through innovative media. They are doing that by helping us share this forum with all of you.
So now we're going to transition to our guidelines for the forum. So we're going to review those guidelines and introduce the candidates running to be Hawaii's next governor who are here with us today. Each candidate will be provided 2 minutes to share an opening statement. We will pose 5 main questions to each candidate. Depending upon the question, you'll have 1 or 2 minutes to respond, and we'll notify you in advance. Then we will transition and ask questions submitted by many of our partners. Due to time constraints and to pose as many questions as possible, we will not have time for candidate rebuttals. We will use an internal timer and work together to ensure each candidate has equal time to provide responses. And right here on this table, we have some friendly reminders. We have some visual time cards to remind you how much time you have left to complete answering a question. 15 seconds before your time is up, you will hear a single bell. If you go over by 10 seconds, you will hear a double bell, and we will move on to the next candidate or question. The order the candidates answer questions were chosen at random. So again,
the candidates joining us today are Vicky Cayetano, Gary Corduroy, Kai Kahele, and Heidi Tsuneyoshi. We also extended invitations to Josh Green and BJ Penn. However, they were unable to attend this forum. We will begin with each candidate providing an opening statement. You each have 1 minute. Vicky, we're going to ask that you go first, followed by Gary, Kai, and Heidi. You can bring up the ends. Mahalo.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for being here today and to the ACLU for hosting this. You know, the ACLU plays a critically important role in advocating for the civil liberties and rights of all people. I would submit that our country has never been at a more critical stage in terms of our liberties and rights being compromised. whether it's the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the rampage on democracy in January 6, and the ever-dismantling of the separation between church and state. These are all issues that concern me. And I would also point out that the appointment of Supreme Court justices is a very important role, as we've seen in the last 3 years. So with all of this, where are we today? I think that this forum is an ideal opportunity to hear from each of the candidates what our concerns would be and how we would respond to them if we're elected governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. And thank you for all who are joining us today. Thank you, ACLU, for hosting the event. I'm very grateful to be here, and I love the slogan, People.Prisons. What we long for as a state and as a community, as a nation, is for equal justice for all of the people. That the people would actually be able to live under a standard set of rules, standard set of laws that release people into the liberties that are provided under the Constitution. As governor, what I long for, and believe what all of us long for, is for government to actually provide that platform. No longer should there be winners and losers, preferential treatment. On the contrary, that everybody would be treated with the same respect and honor according to the law. These decisions made by the governor, you are correct, they will be very important in this process over the next 4 years. So I'm grateful for this time. Thank you.
Aloha winala kako. I'm Kai Kahele. I bring a unique perspective to this candidate forum, and mahalo for having this. I'm a native Hawaiian and represent so many native Hawaiians across Hawaii that have been imprisoned, incarcerated, and had their sense of place, loss of aina, for 100 years. Most people may not know, I'll be honest. I was a juvenile delinquent in high school. Kicked out of Waiakea High School, arrested at 16 years old, went to Olomana Boys Home. Most people don't know that. Hundreds of hours of community service, thousands of dollars in restitution to the people that I affected, arrested at 18 years old for assault. The fact that I'm sitting up here on this stage 30 years later is a miracle. And I bring that perspective to this forum today. Mahalo.
Aloha and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heidi Sunyoshi. Thank you to ACLU and thank you to ʻEkolu Mea Nui for co-sponsoring this event and to its many partners. I am also a native Hawaiian rooted here in these islands. My family origins is from Kenai, Maui. And from Kenai, Maui, we moved to Lapahoihoi and back now to Oahu. So with that rooted sense of place, I decided to run for governor because I am now a mom of my own children. My daughters are 24 and 22. And when I look to them and see what the future holds for them, it's not good. The next generation is looking to us to say, how are we going to fix the many things that we've known about for decades? High cost of living, not being able to afford a home, not having access to good job opportunities, among many other things that we face here in our island home today. As governor, I will bring a unique perspective. My background is mental health services. I've worked in homeless and transitional shelters, in our women's prison, and I also worked as the first ever parenting class in the women's prison, and I look forward to talking with you more about my history and what we can do to protect our legacy and perpetuate our legacy moving forward. Thank you.
Mahalo. For the next question, the candidates have 1 minute to respond. The candidate order is Gary, Vicki, Heidi, and Kai. The question is, please name a civil rights hero who inspires you and why.
Well, I think what comes to mind right off the top is Martin Luther King. I think he established a principle for governance and for relating in society that is not based on race, on color, but rather on performance, on the gift of who the individual is. I believe that that's the cornerstone of a society, and a free society that's free from the names, from the judgments, that we could stand and look at each other as people, authentic gifts. That's what he stood for, a stand for the people to live and exercise their own self-government in liberty and freedom with others. So thank you.
So for me, it would be Patsy Mink, because she stood up for women and girls by enacting Title IX legislation that she led the charge on that got passed so that girls, and this is just 50 years ago, so that girls and women would have the same opportunities as men and boys have had for hundreds of years before. So she's my hero in doing that. Thank you.
Heidi? Heidi, followed by Kai.
Thank you. For myself, I think that our ali'i were great champions for civil liberties before that was even a term. My heroes and those that I really look to as to what we need to do moving forward are our ali'i, our princess, who established an educational system for our people when she realized not just looking at what was needed in the moment, but what her people would need for the long term. It was education. To our Prince Kuhio, who set up a program to ensure that our people had homes. That is the kind of forward leadership in making sure that everybody has the same access to our basic liberties. So I'm very inspired by our own legacy and what we have to look to historically about what we've been taught about how to take care of people. Our queen set up a medical system for us. Our king put our water in public trust. We are the only state that has our water in public trust. So we have had many great examples of how to take care of our people and how to address people's civil liberties. And I'm just grateful that that's a part of my own personal history. Thank you.
For me, it would be Prince Kuhio. I also agree. What an amazing leader. We all have seen that photo of Prince Kuhio in a prison suit, imprisoned by a racist political justice system after the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. When he, along with Robert Wilcox and others, were part of trying to restore that monarchy. Kuhio would go to the Congress a few years later and would see his people wandering around Waikiki and Honolulu, impoverished, criminalized and wrongfully imprisoned. And through the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, like Heidi mentioned, he knew that returning his people to the Aina, to reconnecting them to the land, was a way to help the Native Hawaiian people that, by the 1920s, shortly after Leleokalani's passing, were on the brink of extinction. And so I think Prince Kuhio would be my civil rights hero.
Mahalo. This next question is, what do you see as some of Hawaii's most needed changes to our criminal, legal, and correctional systems? And what would your administration commit to supporting these changes by making this a priority in your budget if elected governor? The candidate order to address this question is Heidi, Kai, Gary, and Vicky.
Thank you so much. So there's a lot that needs to happen within our state to support people and make sure that incarceration and other issues that people come into are not the path that is most available to them. Right now, unfortunately, with the high cost of living, lack of housing, and just feeling very hopeless in our society today here in Hawaii, there's a lot of negative aspects that happen in people's everyday lives. Like I said, my background is mental health services. So as governor, I would return a lot of the money that we had before at the state level to mental health services to make sure we have a safety net and that we can see young people, individuals, and families who show indicators of possibly going on that track before it even happens. I worked in the women's prison, and I know rehabilitation and having a place to go to after they have their time is critically important to address the issue of recidivism. So I want to make sure that those who go through the system also have a place where they can come back to and get strong again and have a community to be a part of. Thank you.
As governor, three critical appointments that we will have the ability to appoint the right people with the right values to is the Attorney General, Director of Public Safety, and the Parole Authority, the Paroling Board. The governor has clemency powers within his executive powers, but regarding statutory changes, budget changes, it's going to require collaboration with the legislature. But those three critical appointments can make a huge difference in how we move this state forward in a different direction than what we've been doing for so many years. We're the highest incarcerated in Hawaii are Native Hawaiians, where almost 2,000 are imprisoned in the mainland, of which 40% are Native Hawaiians. And so that's something that, I believe is the most important thing that this governor will do before he or she takes office, is build that cabinet and appoint those important positions.
Thank you for that question. Certainly the governor's role in providing for a society that's fair and equitable, that we would experience equal justice across the board, will come through appointments. The fact that his appointments will determine all public policy, whether it's within any of the agencies, but primarily this particular conversation is included in the Department of Health. The governor must pick people to run the Department of Health who actually understand, by way of assessment, what the target is. We must have people who run these divisions, these departments, the directors and the deputy directors, who actually understand the goal, rather than just allocating funds from the legislative branch and just spending the funds without any rhyme or reason. This is why we have the systemic over and over and over again policies that never seem to reach. During all the COVID years, we've seen actually these budgets decrease. So through appropriate selections of directors and appropriate funding, we can make a change.
As governor, I would focus on recidivism. Approximately 90% of those currently incarcerated are repeat offenders. We need to address that. And when I say addressing that, I'm looking at three things. I always say if you incarcerate without a plan to rehabilitate, it is the biggest tragedy. And so rehabilitation would come in the form of addressing substance abuse, mental illness, and for those who have neither of those issues, to help them transition back into the community, not when they're released, but a couple of years before they are released, so that we can give them the skills to transition back into the workforce, into a new world, to help minimize the exposure for them to go back into prison. Thank you.
Thank you. For this next question, each candidate has 2 minutes. Since the 1980s, Hawaii has dramatically increased its reliance on mass incarceration. At any given time, we have nearly 20,000 people under legal supervision, probation, parole, supervised release, and we currently incarcerate over 4,000 people. Our brothers and sisters, our children, our neighbors. For decades, Hawaii's jails and prisons have been overcrowded, resulting in unsafe and unhealthy conditions for incarcerated people and those who work there. Incarceration is costly. The Department of Public Safety has a budget of over $300 million. Taxpayers currently foot the bill, $240 a day, or nearly $80,000 to incarcerate an adult. In return for this conscious investment, we have recidivism rates of over 50 to 60%, meaning that this vicious cycle of incarceration, despair, and exposure to violence often repeats itself. The question is, what steps would you take to reduce the incarcerated population over the next 4 years? The order is Vicky, Heidi, Kai, and Gary.
I don't think anyone disputes that the current system is broken. One of the first things I would do as governor is look at the people who are incarcerated, and for those, for example, who have simple possession of a drug, do they need to be incarcerated? We need to look at what puts people into the prison system. We need to look at justice reform in order to address that. We also need to look at those who go back into prison and what causes that. So I think we need to look at overhauling our system so that we address why people are going in. And I'm not sure that a lot of times it justifies being incarcerated. So I'd look at that. And then for those who are repeat offenders, what makes them go back into prison? Those would be my two focus. Thank you.
One of the main issues that I find with our prison system now is that much of it has turned into a business model as opposed to a place where we're working to make society better on all fronts. We've heard many situations, and as council member, I've worked with different individuals who came here when we tried to relocate OCCC, and clearly when they talked about what they wanted to do in relocating OCCC, was a business model. It wasn't a model where what's going on in your society, what's happening in your communities, and what do we need to do to be a good partner with you in making things better for all of your people. So the first thing will do as governor is I firmly believe that the only way to remove the darkness is to increase the light. Our communities and our people have many things that we suffer through day in and day out. I believe as a governor, one of my main responsibilities is making sure all people have access and have a quality, safe community to grow up in, that you have access to jobs, that your communities are a place where you thrive and don't feel like there's nothing there for you. The idea of not having hope to do something and be a part of something is what causes a lot of the situations that we've had going on in our communities for a very long time. So want to increase opportunities, want to increase support services. I worked in support services in the early 2000s when there was a lot more prevention, especially for our youth. So when we would see a youth or a family that had issues, that something was going on, that we saw that there was going to be some issue within this individual going forward, if there wasn't some kind of support provided, we would get in there early and make sure we had assistance as far as giving support services, financial. Sometimes it was just one paycheck away from becoming homeless, and other situations. We don't have that in our communities anymore. So as governor, we'll really work hard to increase the way we care for our people, provide job opportunities, good educational opportunities in our Department of Education for our keiki, and making sure that parents are supported in raising their children, and the cost of living isn't so high that parents are so stressed out that there's so much violence and negativity in our communities. Thank you.
You know, as governor, you could, and I would immediately explore clemency opportunities for individuals who could be serving a lesser sentence under the current laws than what they're currently serving. We could look at individuals who are incarcerated for any type of technical issues or parole violations. We could look at kupuna, older incarcerated individuals, and the opportunities for clemency for them. We need to bring home those brothers and sisters on the mainland and put an end to private prisons that has existed for decades, that has only exacerbated the problem. You know, as a state senator, I had a chance to tour many of the jails throughout our state, and they are, you can't even describe the overcrowding and the type of conditions that that those that are incarcerated, whether it's pretrial, I mean, it is a total disaster. I don't know how else to describe it. Maui, Hilo, I mean, it has to be addressed. You know, while we look at how to address overcrowding, it's clear that our criminal justice system needs reform, and we need to look at place-based solutions, pu'uhonua type solutions, centered on Native Hawaiian culture and values, and reconnecting individuals who have lost their way with their aina, and that's something that has been taken away from them, and I would address that as governor.
This is a scourge in our society, the fact that we have this recidivism rate of nearly 70%, as you mentioned. I think one of the things as governor has to do is, yes, we really think outside the box. We actually need to adopt effective policies nationwide, not just keep trying to reinvent the same policies we had over and over and over. It starts in the family. These breakdowns of these young men and women on the streets from an early age because there's no father at home, from the top, the governor must actually articulate the importance of family structure, keeping the father at home. This mentoring process is not just within the family. It can happen within family and friends. We must start also at the same time within the education process. Kids must know there's a better way, not to revert, not to leave school and go on the street. Kids need hope. Our young people need hope, and they need direction. We also must have work programs. We used to serve at La Maca. It's a great program. The idea that an inmate or somebody who's incarcerated actually gets job training so that when they get out, they can actually go get a job and have a place to live instead of being told, go get a job. We need the faith community to get involved. We need partnerships like the Chuck Colson Ministry, where they have over a 90% effectiveness rate with no recidivism, but putting people to work, putting their families back together. There are many, and there will be many chances for the government to actually step in and do things differently. But you cannot do any of these things if you don't change the policymakers. It is a business. The correctional system is a business. It is being funded by production. It is no longer funded, and it should be funded by efficiency. That the people who are incarcerated should have a chance. They should know self-dignity, and they should have the ability to work and earn a living. Those would be the primary starting points.
Mahalo. Under the Hawaii State Constitution, the governor has the authority to grant reprieves, commutations, and pardons after conviction for all offenses. This authority provides the governor broad power to remedy long-standing injustices in our criminal legal system by releasing some individuals facing unduly long sentences, reducing the incarcerated population by shortening some people's prison sentences as long as they meet certain criteria and are determined not to pose a danger to the public. Governors in other states have successfully used this broad authority to commute the sentences of categories of people. For example, releasing people who would serve a lesser sentence under current laws than what they are serving, people convicted of drug-related offenses, people incarcerated for technical probation or parole violations, and/or the aging population. The question is, would you commit to following the leadership of other governors in using your clemency powers to return people to their families and communities who have been impacted by overly punitive laws? If so, what would your guiding principles be for using your executive clemency powers? The candidate order, Kai Kahele, Vicky, Heidi, and Gary.
So I think I answered it in the last question.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
That's my
absolutely. Guiding principles, bringing groups like this together who have hosted this forum, and many of you in the audience, and an opportunity to learn, to listen, and to use, evidence, data, community-based inputs to utilize those executive powers. I definitely think that that's something that is warranted and we need to do. Otherwise, it's very difficult to address the root cause of the system.
Yes, I think that, we need to review what those principles, guiding principles would be. But if they're met with community input and the legislature and the governor in agreement, I would support that broad-based clemency.
Thank you. I forgot what the order was. As governor, I would definitely support clemency and looking to individuals who have been a part of the system and what they've done while a part of the system. As mentioned before, I started the first ever parenting program in our women's prison here on Oahu. And when I started that program, the people in the prison and also the people at the program I worked with said, "Are you sure you want to do this? You sure you want to go in?" Because many of these ladies come from a troubled family history. They're not with their children now, so this topic could be very heavy and it could be very difficult for you to talk to them about it in the prisons. I decided to move forward on that program, and I have to say it was one of the most rewarding jobs I've ever done. Just being in with the women and hearing their stories and their backgrounds and what they went through, just having that experience alone, I know for sure that when you sit down and talk with somebody and see what they've been through, see what their heart is, and see what their options are moving forward and the place that they are right now, clemency definitely needs to be an option to be discussed. I met with many women who had a minor infraction that just turned into years of being separated from their families. And the longer they're separated and the longer they're institutionalized, the harder it is for them to come back and regain their place in society. So definitely would be very open to looking to the clemency to make sure that we have that reintegration process earlier on, which would also help with reducing recidivism. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity as governor to be someone who's actually worked within our prison systems to be able to say and recognize the changes that need to be made for the betterment of all people. Thank you.
The governor does have that authority, clemency. The idea of clemency really is to discern what the penalty should actually be for an individual for committing a crime. This is the hard question in our society. What is fair? What is just? Do those who actually have crimes committed against them, do they have a right? Do they have a say? I think clemency is something that's a case-by-case basis. I would obviously do that. There are miscarriages of justice in every element of our society. The fact that we would have a governor who would take the time to listen carefully about these cases, it's a no-brainer. You must do that. That's what equal justice is. On the other hand, those who've been violated by crime, they cannot be taken for granted. I'm a contractor. I've hired a number of men who have been a part of Habilitat, a very governed organization who brings people out of OCCC. They've become my best friends. I've married them. These are just honest, hardworking young men. Do they need a second chance? Absolutely. Should it be on a case-by-case basis? Yes, it should. Should clemency be on the table for those who are at the end of their days? I think it should. I don't think that's an issue. But balancing probation with clemency takes wisdom, and it takes an understanding of what justice is in a society and the consequences of good justice, appropriate justice, and bad policy. This starts with the Attorney General, by the way. The state of Hawaii must have an elected Attorney General, an elected sheriff, an elected ethics commission, and the governor must be very wise on the judges he puts in the courts. These actually are the ones who make the decisions about prison time, who gets prosecuted, what the nature. So that would be my stand, to be very careful about those positions. Thank you.
Mahalo. At this time, I'd like to call up Aubrey Love Kealoha. She's representing ʻEkolu Mea Nui. She's Opio. Aubrey Love Kealoha is a kama o Ko'olau. She will be in the 8th grade at Kamehameha Schools. She enjoys learning about her community strengths and continues to advocate for the resources needed. She has been selected by Michelle Obama Girls Opportunity Alliance to represent her peers in Hawaii. She spent the earlier part of the summer on Kaho'olawe practicing aloha aina. Aubrey believes and encourages any of her peers to get involved with their community and do the same. And so Aubrey's going to be asking a question this evening.
Hawaii's prison system is severely overcrowded and unsanitary. Some facilities are holding between 2 to 3 times as many people as they were designed for. This is especially dangerous during the pandemic, where half of the incarcerated population contracted COVID-19 and a record number of people died. Due to overcrowding, in 1995, the Department of Public Safety started to send incarcerated people to out-of-state private for-profit prisons. Although this was hailed as a temporary solution to overcrowding, we continue this practice today with over 1,000 people serving their sentences in Core Civics Prison in Arizona, and with no exit plan in place. Other states have faced similar challenges with overcrowding and found success with bipartisan criminal league reforms to decarcerate or reduce their incarcerated population. Significantly, these states invested in data-driven strategies and reduced their incarcerated population from 8,000 to 40,000 people without jeopardizing public safety. And the question is, as governor, will you support building an estimated $1 billion jail expansion project on Oahu or investing in alternative to incarceration to address overcrowding? Please explain. And the candidate order is Heidi, Gary, Vicky, and Kai.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us today and being a representative and a champion for our future generations. My 2 daughters are graduates of Kamehameha schools, and it's always good to see another up-and-coming graduate. Thank you. To the question with how to address the overpopulation, you're correct. That has been an issue for our state for quite some time, and the idea of sending our people out and dealing with that further separation from their home is something that is very personal to me, and I believe that we need to address that right away. So as far as addressing the overcrowding and sending people to the continental United States to serve their terms, I do believe we need a new approach in how we're addressing the overcrowding. One is definitely to look to redevelopment of our current prison. It is deplorable. It's beyond comprehension that we've let it get to that state. It's unsafe, not only for those who are serving time, but also for those who work within the system. I have a family who is working in the meal prep, and just hearing some of the stories of what they handle there in the kitchen is just unheard of. So first and foremost, really looking to, like I said, strengthen our communities so we reduce the number of individuals that are incarcerated in the first place and build stronger communities. But then to address the overcrowding, look quickly to build a new building for us to be able to have safe places, and to look to make sure that we are bringing as many people as we can back home, because it is a further separation when they have to serve their time so far away from their families. It's hard on the family, it's hard on the individual, and we do need to stop having that situation happen in our state. Thank you for that question.
Great question, thank you. And I share with Heidi's affirmation. So good to see a young person taking such responsibility. That's fantastic. The question, it just actually reveals everything that we've discussed up to this point. The fact that our justice system is in chaos. The fact that our leadership over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years hasn't actually thoughtfully thought ahead of what's required to have a system that actually rehabilitates people and allows them the possibility to get out of prison back into life. Some of the things that we need to do as a society is begin to consider. I've been in Halava. I've looked and I've walked through those corridors. It is a dark place, and it is dark because it's literally dark, and it's filthy. Is this a place for corrections? I don't think so. Do we need more prisons? Everybody agrees we need more prisons. But we live in a society where the society says, not in my backyard. This is the issue. Our communities statewide must take responsibility for the well-being of those who are incarcerated. We do need different types of facilities. We should focus our resources on facilities that's primary task is rehabilitation. There are those who do not want to be rehabilitated. They're going to spend their time in prison. I'm just going to be square. This is a difficult conversation. But the hope is that you create enough opportunities for people to actually see a pathway forward. This happens with government help, but this has to happen with community support. We need facilities. There are facilities that have been shut down. Some of them need to be dedicated just to being reformed from drug addiction. These are the kinds of policies that cause recidivism. They get out on the street. The first thing they do is they get high. The next thing they do is they find themselves in trouble with the law again. So if we want to have change in the system, it's a cultural change, it's a community participation, and it's an allocation of resources so that there's the facilities to actually provide the opportunities for these things to happen. Thank you.
You know, it is a tragedy that our family members and people that one may know their way in Arizona, but let's remember why that came to be. And it is correct that, unfortunately, so many people said not in our backyard. There was supposed to be a prison built on Hawaii Island, but the people would not support that. Right. And that's why this was the only alternative. So we do need communities to really have these discussions to understand why it's important. If we want to rehabilitate and not just lock them up and throw the key away, they need to be here so that their families can continue to be part of their lives. The conditions of the prisons are deplorable. I think this is where, again, not just in this system, but across government in general, there really is a lack of accountability. And this is so important. You know, we should be looking at the people we serve, whether they're in prison or out, as just that we serve them. Yes, we need to hold them accountable for what they have done, but we need to look at it as supporting them so that one day they can come back and be part of the community. Thank you.
Like you said, we spend $300 million a year on this. It's extremely costly, and it's not just a cost. It is devastating to the individual that is imprisoned or is sent away from Hawaii, 2,000 miles away from his or her home. You know, our prisons we treat prisoners in our prisons like dogs. That's what I've seen. And if you treat people like that, they're just going to get more and more and more upset, angry, and it's been like that for decades. And so there is no plan, no program on reentry. Some of our laws require mandatory prison sentences. Those things need to be looked at. But I think there's so much we can do based on Aloha Aina and based on a Pu'uhonua model. Office of Hawaiian Affairs has done extensive studies with organizations like this as well in how you can create programs and rehabilitation programs centered around Native Hawaiian cultural values. We all know Native Hawaiians represent the highest amount of the incarcerated, along with Pacific Islanders. It's the same on the mainland with African Americans. Those that get the opportunity to come out, they can't get a job unless, and thank you, Gary, for giving those individuals a second chance on life. I really appreciate that. They can't get a job. They can't get a driver's license. Sometimes they can't even get reconnected to their kids. They get fines that they have to pay. And it never allows them to get ahead of life. And you separate them from their families. You don't allow them to participate civically if they can't vote. And so those are all the things that we really need to address as a state, and as governor, working together with the legislature. I really believe we can do that.
Despite the fact that the federal criminal courts eliminated cash bail since 1984, and a growing number of states have reformed their bail system or eliminated cash bail to end pre-trial detentions based on wealth, our current governor just vetoed an extremely modest and controversial bail reform bill. Under our current cash bail system, half of the people in Hawaii's overcrowded jails are there simply because they can't afford bail. Our current system lets the size of a person's wallet determine whether a person who has been accused but not convicted of a crime can return home to their family or stay locked up in jail while awaiting their day in court. The question I have is, do you support ending cash bail in Hawaii? If so, what is your plan and timeline for ending the use of cash bail, and how will you ensure that significantly fewer people are incarcerated while awaiting their trial? The candidate order, Gary, Heidi, Vicky, Kai.
Thank you. Cash bail in Hawaii. Actually, I'm not in support of eliminating that. I think that I think the premise, and this came from conversations that I've had with numerous businesses here in Hawaii. On Keamuku, I just met with a young man, opened a new business. He's had smash and grab a couple of times. There's gangs of young people running around the state with a car, smashing people's window, grabbing their stuff. Why is this happening? We've heard other municipalities requested to come into Hawaii to discuss this very matter. How effective is the idea that we would eliminate cash bail? It has not been effective, as much as I would love it to be effective. It actually removes the consequences for a small dollar crime up to $1,000. The idea, and I would just assert that the idea that the folks that are doing these crimes are going to come out and they're going to go home to their family and there's going to be some kind of accountability within their family, I don't believe that that's so. I believe the fact that they're not having accountability before they do these crimes reveals that it's not so. I think bail reform is required. I honestly don't know the number of people who are incarcerated waiting for bail and for what type of crime. If there was a way to identify the type of crime and the associated bail that's appropriate to assure that they meet their court date, then I think that's up for review. But the idea of removing any kind of consequence for bad behavior in our society leads to more bad behavior. It does not restrain unlawful behavior. I would say that actually, on the contrary, it affirms it.
Thank you. So currently on the Honolulu City Council, I serve as the chair of public safety. And so public safety and everything that goes on with when an individual is brought in after being found with HPD to need to go in to see about a pretrial and figure out what's happening with his case. There is an issue here that we have in our county right now, and it is happening within our state as well as the minor crimes that we're seeing happening with property crimes and other things are the issues that were addressed in the bail reform bill that was vetoed, and it was for property crimes, which it was saying that property crimes are something that is minimal, that there isn't a violent attack on anyone or it doesn't involve drugs or anything like that. The issue that I have, and I came publicly out to say that I would support the veto of that measure at this time, is that there was another act that was passed in the last legislative session that looked for bail reform to see how to very clearly specify it so that even if it was an issue of property crime, there was a way to make sure that those individuals that are repeat offenders and are going out to the same businesses, like was mentioned over and over again, and having minimal property crimes, that that doesn't happen, because our communities definitely need to feel a sense of security. But what I do feel needs to happen is that our social justice system and our criminal justice system needs to work in parallel. So my idea as far as governor would be that we remain focused on bail reform that is really looked at in a very detailed way to ensure that property crimes and things of that nature aren't continued in our communities that hurt our businesses, but also work with social justice reform with individuals and organizations like the ACLU to say if there are individuals who are remaining in custody just from not being able to pay for their bail, that we can work together for programs that help with that financial assistance. Having my background in mental health services, there is a mental health and social justice component of what needs to happen, and there's definitely the public safety component, and I think those need to be working in parallel. So I'd love to work with ACLU on how we can manage those issues where it's just a matter of not having the monetary means. So I think it's a large conversation, that we need to have. Sorry, I didn't see that. Thank you. Thank you.
You know, so many businesses are suffering, as you've read, smash and grab, repeated assaults for these businesses. I think bail reform is something that should be looked at. I think if it's a first offense, I would support that. But for repeat offenders, I'm not sure how you can support that because they can't make the bail. I mean, the offenses has been, created in the first place. This is why we're having this discussion. I think we always have to also consider the public safety of our community, our children, keeping that in mind as well. So, yes, I support reviewing the bail reform process, but I would likely not be in favor of revoking bail for those who are repeat offenders. Thank you.
I would be open to, clean slate legislation and bail reform, cash bail reform. I think we've got to start with the legislature. Even the bill's original introducer asked the governor to veto the bill. I mean, how is that possible? That a bill would go through both chambers of the legislature and conference, and then the introducer of the bill would ask the governor to veto the bill. So I think the system is broken, and some of the things that are being done at the legislature, we need a strong governor that can work together with the 76 members of the legislature. Many of them are going to be new faces this year that are going to be coming to the legislature. Haven't been in these situations before. But I think it's something that, looking at the governor's intent, his reasonings for veto, working together with legislators, clearly the two on the Judiciary Committee chairs, Senator Rhodes, they're important individuals in this. And figuring out what we can do with the upcoming legislative session. Whoever's next governor of Hawaii is going to be sworn in on the first Monday of December. There's not much time. There's like 45 days before the 2023 legislature convenes. You got appointments to fill, you got directors to fill, boards and commissions to fill, you got a budget to create, and you got policy initiatives in the governor's package that needs to be introduced. Working together with the ACLU and these organizations, I think would be really critical in coming up with a bill that we can address in the next legislative session.
Mahalo. For the next question, we have 2 minutes. The question is, each year, at least 15,000 different people are booked into our local jails throughout Hawaii. And just to repeat again, at any given time, we have over 4,000 people in our jails and prisons and over nearly 20,000 under legal supervision. Throughout Hawaii's criminal legal system, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, African American, Black people, and even Filipinos are overrepresented. But this is particularly stark for Native Hawaiians, who make up double the percentage of people incarcerated compared to the percentage of our total population. And this overrepresentation of Native Hawaiians in the carceral system is not new. For decades, research and reports by Dr. Jean Kassenbaum, Alulike, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, the Native Hawaiian Criminal Justice Task Force, HCR 85 Task Force, census data, and even the Department of Public Safety's own data confirms these racial and ethnic disparities. In the Native Hawaiian Justice Report from 2020, and I quote, researchers found that Native Hawaiians are overrepresented in every stage in the criminal legal system, and the disproportionality increases as Native Hawaiians go further into the system, also making it harder to leave and stay out of prison. If elected governor, what will you do to address this gross injustice and eliminate racial disparities in who gets locked up? And the order of the question is Kai, Heidi, Gary, and Vicky. 2 minutes, please.
So as a Native Hawaiian, this is important for me. Like you said, so many Native Hawaiians represent the highest amounts of incarcerated in this state. They're at par with African Americans at the national level and Native American Indians. It would be a priority of my administration to do everything we could, examine all tools possible within the powers of the office of the governor to correct any type of racial bias in our criminal justice system, and to address the long-standing issues that have led to Native Hawaiians that have the highest incarcerated rates in our prison population, in addition to other Pacific Islanders that also represent that same category.
Heidi?
Thank you. So there's a lot that we need to do to address the situation of the high numbers of our Native Hawaiian population being represented and being incarcerated. For myself, it is a generational situation, and it's also a historical situation of what our people have dealt with for many generations that has led to different indicators that we know are indicators for the chance of being incarcerated, the potential of becoming incarcerated at some point. These are socioeconomic factors. These are factors about having access to good jobs, access to services, just access to feeling like you're a part of a community that welcomes you and you have opportunities moving forward. So as governor, a major focus of my administration would be to work with our many Native Hawaiian organization and partners to go out and make sure we're working with our Native Hawaiian individuals, families, and communities to address the issues, the systemic issues that are there. One of them is definitely housing. Another one is definitely an issue of having access to good jobs, access to education, and just access for what is important to Native Hawaiians as far as who we are and how we operate, having access to our land, having access to to those cultural activities that make us feel whole and connected. And I think that's something we definitely have to look at to decrease the incidence of incarceration. So looking forward to bringing in the many partners to where we can do better and strengthen our supports for our Native Hawaiian communities. As we know, we have a lot of groups within our Native Hawaiian organizations, starting also with Department of Hawaiian Homelands, and making sure we finally create homes and communities for our people. As Governor, I'll work with the Department of Land and Natural Resources to have an accounting of all our land, work with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands to make sure we have access to developments for housing at a large scale and not 10 at a time, 15 at a time, but many, many housings coming online for our people, and work with Office of Hawaiian Affairs to make sure we're moving that money out to do those developments. Housing is a place where we need to start for our Native Hawaiian communities, and I will look to do that right away. Thank you. I see you this time. Thank you.
This reality became more clear several weeks ago when we sat out under the mango tree with the Kapuna Council on the west side. The conversations that we had with those who have lived there on the west side for generations was rich, but it was sobering. The common theme in the conversation was the west side has been disregarded and forgotten. They even call Honolulu centric, just like the neighbor islands do. Yet they're only a few miles down the freeway. The idea that they're disrespected and not a part of the community, this is what must change. If you tell somebody long enough, over and over and over, you're not worthy, you're not capable, it's not possible, this lie must be refuted. The people, the Kanaka Maoli in Hawaii, they must have the opportunity to excel, to operate in their own self-government, to own their lands, to be able to farm in the communities that they long for, to be able to go into valleys that lands that belong to them, the water rights. These are the kinds of issues that they long for, that people long for. It does not matter what race it is. This is a human being issue. All peoples desire equal justice. All people want an equal opportunity. Many of the Hawaiian people who live here, they don't believe that about themselves. And this is the charge, that governor would exalt the people, not in a place of adoration, but as in a place of self-government, as a way to give themselves, to develop self-respect and take back their communities. This is what we long for. This is why I hold that it's liberty and right government is the solution to almost all of these issues. So thank you.
Knowing that there's such a disproportionate percentage of those incarcerated being Native Hawaiians, it's really hard for me to not believe that it hasn't been a detailed study as to why that is so. You know, is it because they don't have access to a quality of legal representation? Or is it education or employment opportunities? I mean, with all the studies that the legislature and the executive branch have been doing over the years, it's really painful and disappointing to hear that this hasn't been done. So I think that would be the first step that we need to do in order to address them with purposeful resolution. Thank you.
Because of mandatory retirement, our next governor will have the opportunity to fill 3 vacancies on the Hawaii Supreme Court by the end of their first term. As we've seen with the U.S. Supreme Court, such judicial appointments can have a dramatic impact on the direction of our state and the law, particularly our civil liberties and civil rights. What considerations would be the most important to you in making these appointments? And what qualities, philosophies, and perspectives and experience would you look for in potential nominees? The order: Heidi, Gary, Kai, and Vicky.
Thank you. That is a huge opportunity, I believe, in making some substantial changes for how things are in our justice system. And as governor, the main quality that I would look for in potential nominees is their heart for the people. Because for me, if I don't see a heart for the people, then it's very difficult for me to see you in a place where you're making judgment on the people and making very significant changes to what the people expect to see here in our state. So it's definitely going to be, how connected are you to our people, to our land, and to our place? What is your thoughts for what our legacy is going to be for our people here and for our land? And that is going to be the main qualifier for me, as well as, of course, having good qualification as far as background, hardworking, truthful, transparent, and being willing to be on board about just moving forward and doing whatever it takes to create a brighter future for all of us. So it will come down to what kind of heart and perspective that individual brings when they come and discuss their potentials as a nominee. Thank you.
Great question. We've seen over the last number of decades the fight around the nominees for the Supreme Court. We've seen that these nominees have become exceedingly political and partisan. This is the problem with justice. We've just seen even their desire to make this ruling leaked before the people, that these justices' lives should be at stake for simply affirming the Constitution. This was their role. The primary criteria for selecting judges for me as governor will first of all be, will they uphold the Constitution? The Constitution is the founding document that provides for equal justice for all of the people. It is a nonpartisan position. It must be based on their integrity, their credibility, and their history to do so. There must not be any partisan positions in the judge. They must use the law. The law has established what is just and fair. Thank you.
Individuals that have the highest, highest bar of integrity, of character, of aloha, that aloha spirit should represent the diversity of this state. We've seen when we've talked about Native Hawaiians, the highest incarcerated. When we had a Native Hawaiian Supreme Court Justice, Justice Richardson, who rendered a decision on water rights with McBride, Sugar, and Robinson, we saw what happened. It would change the course of history in terms of water rights in Hawaii. So those three appointments are absolutely critical in the next first term of next governor of Hawaii. And I really believe that those individuals need to have the connection to Aina, have a connection to place. We saw decisions rendered by the Supreme Court on the 30-meter telescope, on revocable permits, on East Maui water rights, and these individuals make really, really important decisions, and it's critical we put the right people on the state Supreme Court.
I think it's very important that the appointees are people who serve and represent the people of Hawaii, the diversity, the inclusiveness of Hawaii, and that they're not selected based on that they don't make decisions based on their personal beliefs. I think that they need to support the separation of church and state. Let's remember that our founding fathers, they came here from countries from Europe to escape religious persecution. And third, I think it's really important that they are not politicized and not partisan in the selection process. That would be those are my criteria. Thank you.
Mahalo. The next question is 1 minute. The order will be Vicky, Kai, Gary, and Heidi. Recently, we've heard in the news about the absence of young girls incarcerated in juvenile facilities in Hawaii due to long-term reform efforts focusing on trauma-informed care, diversion programs, family support, but it also included a Department of Justice investigation, the ACLU filing a lawsuit, a task force of community members coming together to make recommendations. But yet this decline in the carceral system for youth has been continuous, but it's not something we can just leave to chance. It's been intentional. However, the number of women caught up in Hawaii's criminal legal system has skyrocketed. Many of these women struggle with substance use, mental illness, and are often victims of physical and sexual abuse. Incarcerating women who are also mothers and caregivers traumatizes families, their keiki, driving the cycle of mass incarceration? How will you work to divert women from the carceral system, and if incarcerated, to protect their health and safety of women in custody and facilitate their successful reentry back home into our communities? And the order again, Vicky, Kai, Gary, and Heidi.
You know, we all know how important it is for women, especially those who are mothers, to be with their families. I think we need to make sure that they're given the support, whether it's emotional or mental illness, substance abuse, while they're incarcerated. I think it's absolutely critical, once again, to really focus on rehabilitate in partnership with while they're being incarcerated. With respect to the abuse and the assaults that they've endured, absolutely that cannot be tolerated. And, you know, I think one of the challenges is there is such a significant shortage of prison wardens in the system that this is creating tremendous stress. And the people that they're taking it out on are those who are incarcerated. This has to be at the forefront of addressing this problem. We need to protect these women while they're incarcerated. Thank you.
Absolutely need to protect the women that are incarcerated. You know, separating women from their families is devastating for women that are incarcerated. And the opportunity many women have, they have children, and to be able to be connected to their children and see their children as part of that, you know, rehabilitative process, I think is absolutely critical. Any type of abuse in our prisons, you know, absolutely would not be tolerated. I think it goes further to a prison system that is broken in this state. You know, we've talked about those incarcerated. You know, there's also those that work there. The ACOs, those that work at our jails and our prisons that are overstressed, they're overworked, they're understaffed, and that also leads to these issues as well.
Well, I haven't been in the women's prison, so, but I can say that just primarily from a common sense perspective, there shouldn't be interaction between a male and a female in a prison scenario. It should be women with women. This is so fundamental from a common sense perspective. It again reveals the breakdown in our judicial system. We should have accelerated programs leading to early parole if possible. I think the abuse that goes on in a woman's life prior to entering a facility to making crimes is significant. These women have to have the opportunity to have counseling, to have drug programs to get them off drugs, but as soon as possible, they should go back into society. They should be back with their families. And so that would be the model that I would take. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to thank ACLU for the work that you did to highlight that issue and to make sure that there was significant focus on it. And you're right, it's not going to happen by accident. It has to happen by choice and by focused attention. Like I said, I did work in the women's prison offering the first ever parenting program, and seeing it from the inside out, there's not enough support for women who are incarcerated. There's not enough programs for them. Many of them, having talked with them one-on-one, domestic violence and abuses in early childhood, as for even our incarcerated male population, is a big issue. So one of the main things that I would work for as governor and work with other groups like ACLU and others is to also address domestic violence and make sure that when a woman finds herself in a violent situation, she has a place to go that's safe with her children, because it does become generational when our keiki are with their mothers in an unsafe place. So there's a lot that we need to do to create safe environments for our women and to make sure that everything that they've been through is addressed, that when they are in the system, there's also support for them there for mental health services to help them become stronger and stronger and stronger within themselves, so they're in a better place to start their lives again once they re-enter with their families and their children. Thank you.
Everyone should have the opportunity to work, take care of their families, and contribute to their communities. However, in Hawaii, people with criminal records, from arrests to convictions, continue to face systemic barriers to employment, safe housing, education, obtaining a license, and accessing other benefits and life opportunities. This makes the process of successful reintegration nearly impossible. A growing number of states have enacted bipartisan clean slate laws which automatically expunge arrest and conviction records if a person stays crime-free for a period of time. Clean slate laws are rooted in the belief that people who have made mistakes, paid their debts to society, and now want to make a better life for themselves and their families deserve second chances. Hawaii's current expungement laws are very narrow, but could be expanded as Connecticut, Utah, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and a handful of other states have demonstrated. Do you support clean slate legislation that would help people move forward with their lives and support themselves and their families? Candidate order, Kai, Heidi, Vicky, Gary.
Yes.
Is that your final answer?
All right.
Answer. Yes.
Heidi?
I would love to be as succinct as you. But yes, definitely would support clean slate legislation, especially for the issues that we talked about wanting to be able to be gainfully employed. We say to individuals returning back into our society, the best way is to have gainful employment, get good housing, do all these things, but having a record keeps them from doing many of those things. I have individuals who I work with even now that have a DUI and they can't get certain jobs because they had a DUI so long ago. And so even with those issues of having something like a DUI affect your ability to get a job, just continues in the cycle of feeling like no hope. What am I going to do? I can't even get a job. So it's definitely a path forward in making sure we build resiliency in individuals and giving them opportunity and a path forward. So yes. Thank you.
So while I like to say yes, I think it really depends on the crime. So I do support expanding the expungement law. I do. But I think for some of the more egregious crimes committed, I'm not sure I could support that. Crimes like murder, I would have a difficult time supporting expungement of something like that. Thank you.
I mentioned earlier that I've hired young men who've come out of prison. They actually went back into prison. I wrote their parole officer, got them back out of prison, and rehired them. It's a matter of faith. I believe government should actually provide incentives to employers to hire them. I also don't believe that the public should not know about violent crimes, that you're going to hire somebody, you're going to have somebody working for your company in a house that's a convicted rapist in the home with a mother and a daughter. The legal ramifications of that information being withheld are staggering. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that you just simply make carte blanche expungement laws. I think you're very selective. I think this is part of the parole system. I think this is part of actually figuring out what's wrong with the justice system. But it's a stand for the people. The people must stand for the wholeness of its citizens. And it starts with the least among them. And in this case, we're talking about those who have been incarcerated. So thank you.
Hawaii has, we're ready, right? Okay. Hawaii has the highest number of arrests of public school students compared to other states. This is known as the school-to-prison pipeline. According to a study conducted by the University of Hawaii, from 2013 to 2016, more than 1,000 public school students were arrested. These students are disproportionately Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, Black, and those with disabilities. The report used data from the U.S. Office of Civil Rights, DOE, and Honolulu Police Department. The report also found Hawaii's schools contacted law enforcement more frequently than any other state. Research makes clear that schooling significantly reduces criminal activity. This means finding legitimate alternatives to suspension and expulsion practices, limiting police referrals and arrests, and investing more in school-based mental health providers. Taxpayers currently foot the bill of $240 a day, or nearly $80,000 a year, to incarcerate an adult, but we spend less than $10,000 to educate a keiki in our public schools per year, and $7,000 per pupil in our charter schools. If elected governor, what will you do to advance education justice in Hawaii's public school system and stop the school to prison pipeline? Candidate order, Gary, Heidi, Kai, and Vicky.
This issue of youth arrests that our kids are truant from school, they're not participating in the education process. This is a real breakdown within the department itself. 45% of all the funds that DOE receives goes to the administration piece. These monies should be reallocated, and there should be individual testing of the students to ensure they're actually ready to move on to the next grade. Once you make 8th grade and you're still reading at the 3rd grade level, you give up. I've talked to teachers in urban Honolulu. These kids long for somebody to mentor them and give them another possibility. Maybe it's a work program. Maybe it's another way of learning. But they must see the value of education and staying connected to their community. Otherwise, they're on the street. So I believe it's an allocation resource, an allocation targeted resource that would actually bring these kids out of hopelessness, back into the classroom. This money that's being spent should be spent on tutoring. These kids must be proficient before they move on to the next grade. Thank you.
Thank you. So professionally, I worked as a behavioral health specialist in our Department of Education at Lelehua High School, and I worked with at-risk youth at risk of having issues with education and other barriers. And many of the students that I work with on my caseload were Native Hawaiian and had other indicators of having some kind of issue going on within their family home or some kind of stressor that was going on, that really if we had the support to address that family and that student early on, then the trajectory for that student would have been a lot different. I'm blessed to have had the opportunity to work with many families and students and help them through some very difficult times. So I'm in very strong support, and as governor would put a lot more mental health services and support services for our school-age children and even early education children, because the sooner we get and provide that support for families and individuals, the better the outcomes. I also will be in strong support of moving our trade education systems back into our schools. Some students don't learn in the traditional way of sitting down and doing things, and we need definitely to have AINA-based programs, trade programs, and all different kinds of programs to keep students engaged in our schools. Thank you.
We need early child care. We need universal preschool. We need an entire top-down look at the DOE. You're right, Gary. It's heavy on the admin side. Of the 180,000 students in the DOE, 26% of them are Native Hawaiian. 25% of them are Filipino. The rest of them are Pacific Islander and the other ethnic races in this state. Our teachers are underpaid. They're overworked. They're teaching in classrooms that should have 25 students. They have 37 students. They're the lowest paid teachers in the nation when factoring in COLA, and it's why every single year we have 1,200 teacher vacancies. Of those 1,200 teacher vacancies, 600 classrooms across the state on any given day don't have a qualified licensed teacher. These 80,000 students are being babysat. They're being taught by the janitor, the person at the front office, an unlicensed, unqualified teacher. So if we want to really value our public education system, then we need to look at structural changes to do that. And guess what? One of us on this stage, hopefully, will appoint the next 3 members to the Board of Education in his or her first 6 months. Those are critical appointments because that sets education policy and public education policy in this state.
I think it's really important to do everything to work with them at the school level before they even go to being incarcerated, because that is really the wrong path for these young people to take. So I think we need to support our school system with more resources. I know, for example, the budget for special education is very understated, and that is something that, as governor, I would look to immediately address. But I think we need to support the schools, whether it's with mental illness, emotional support, those children who aren't succeeding as well, having them tutored. We need to do everything at that level before they have to go into the being incarcerated. I think that is really a dead end, and I would do everything to make sure that that's the last resort. Thank you.
Okay, we're in the home stretch. We have 2 more questions. Surveillance and military technologies have been used in Hawaii to intimidate and oppress certain communities more than others, especially during peaceful demonstrations. This happened on Mauna Kea and in Kahuku as people exercised their First Amendment rights. Would you support statewide legislation that maximizes the public's influence of whether or not police can acquire, deploy military and surveillance equipment? If so, what is your vision? Question, we have 1 minute. Vicki, Heidi, Kai, and Gary.
For me, that's really not a yes or no answer. I would want to work with those who are looking at doing this to see what reasons they would need to do this for. Certainly, we want to support the people's rights, but security is a big issue for everyone now as well. We're not living in the safest of times, so I don't think I could say yes or no to support or not. I would want to know more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I would definitely support limiting the surveillance of our peaceful protests. You mentioned Mauna Kea. You also mentioned Kahuku. I was a part of both of those. So when Mauna Kea was going on, we know that Governor declared it a state of emergency. He sent the National Guard. He sent police, all kinds of enforcement going up there to Mauna Kea. So I decided for myself as a council member to go up there and see what is the state of emergency and why do we need all these law enforcement? Why do we have threats of like having the booms going off and all these things going on up here? I went up and it was the most amazing community I've ever seen or been a part of. It was in Aloha Aina. Everybody had protocols. Everything was going as it should, in my opinion. And I don't believe that there should be surveillance or overhanded things. With Kahuku, the wind turbines that went in were approved before I took office. As soon as I took office, they were built. And it was one of the saddest things I've ever had to do, seeing those trailers bringing in those wind turbines to Kahuku. And I stood with the people at that time too, and definitely do feel that people have the right to peaceful protest without surveillance. Thank you.
Yes, I also agree with Heidi, and I want to mahalo her for coming to Moko Keawe and coming up as a sitting Honolulu City Councilwoman to take the time to come to Mauna Kea. You know, I spent several times up there as well, several nights up there as well, and what happened on the Mauna was a total disaster. It was a total travesty. The fact that we had to issue a state of emergency and send in the National Guard and send in DLNR and fly over dozens of policemen from Maui and from Oahu to arrest Kupuna and to arrest our wahine on the front lines. And you know, that's not the issue. The issue is people feeling like government has left them behind, that they no longer follow our own laws. We fast track approvals for developments and processes, and people are desperate. And when you see people desperate, that is exactly what happens. And you know, our kupuna sat on the lines, and I fully supported it.
When I hear the word surveillance, my skin crawls. I think we live in a surveillance society. Everything from the traffic cam to enhanced surveillance in our society does not serve the people. We long for liberty, not government intrusion. For the last 2 years, I fought this whole system, First Amendment rights, a Law of Freedom Coalition on the streets of Waikiki, standing for the liberty for the people, that government should not break people's civil and constitutional rights for any reason. This is why they're called rights. Even the mana, that Governor Ige would issue an executive order to have people arrested when all what was required is that government would humble themselves and seek the forgiveness of the people. Instead, they push forward, breaking their promises. This is why the ball goes out of bounds. As governor, we will reorder this way of thinking, this culture that we have of presumption that government decides what is right for the people. The government should serve the people. We are not the governor's resource. Thank you.
Last question. 95% of all people who are incarcerated will eventually return to our community. Yet our current correctional system provides limited support services and reintegration planning to help people successfully transition as they exit our jails and prisons to transition home. If elected governor, what do you envision as the role of the community to provide the support services and foster healing and transformation? How would you support community development in this area so that this responsibility does not fall solely upon the Department of Public Safety? Candidate order, Kai, Heidi, Vicky, Gary.
We need to treat people with compassion. We need to treat them with empathy and aloha aina and implement place-based solutions and aloha aina solutions and pu'uhonua type solutions to help individuals that re-enter our community. People come into our community, they'll go right back into and deal with substance abuse, unemployment, reconnecting with their families. There's so much that we can do together for individuals that are coming back into our society. And I really believe that they want to be productive members of our society, but it starts, it starts in the home. It starts with family, and it starts with ohana. And we've gotten away from that. And that's something that I really believe, as governor, I will bring a unique perspective to the office of the governor that can address these and many other issues in this state.
Thank you. As governor, to address the issue of lack of support for after an individual comes back into society, I will have a legislative package that includes funding for restorative healing programs, not just for the individual, but for the families that they're coming back to. There's a big transition, not only for the individual back into their communities, but also for the families who are welcoming them back home. Depending on how long they were apart from their family, there's a lot of adjustments that need to happen. And when we talk about where we put our money and thinking where our focus is, right now, if you look at where we spend our money, it's so much money to incarcerate an individual and almost no money to help them with stopping recidivism, stopping that cycle of continually going back to the same thing. And we need to, as a government and as your next governor, show you what is important to our people by putting our money to those types of programs. And as governor, we'll have substantially increased funding for those programs for the individual and their families when they re-enter society. Thank you.
I think it's really important, as I said earlier, to start the transition before they're released, to help them transition into opportunities in the workforce, in housing, and whatever skills they need to learn, new skills. Our world is changing so quickly, and it's so important for them to do this early on in order to give them the best chance at being successful. In the company that I used to run, we had these programs and we hired them, and we made a point not waiting for them to check in, but for us to ask them, how are you doing? What kind of support do you need? I think that's so important, to treat them with the respect and compassion they deserve, and to help them transition not when they are released, but before that, to a more so that they have more chance of being successful as they transition back into the community. Thank you.
Over the last 4 election cycles, we've heard about sustainable farming and going away from tourism. I believe the government has the opportunity to create programs for these people coming out of the system to get to work in the fields, to actually get their hands in the earth, There's nothing more powerful than just being in the earth and working things out. This is an avenue where government can work along with its citizens and provide opportunities that we would have ag here in Hawaii again. Government can open these opportunities by providing land resources, by providing educational pieces, and make it a pathway and a portion and a part of probation. A logical, systematic plan where people can come out of the system and go straight to work. It will serve them, it will serve their families, and it will serve the communities for all that we hope for. So I long for a community that serves its people in practical ways. We can't just keep talking about what we're going to do and how we're going to spend more money. It must be practical. Thank you.
Okay, those were all of our questions, but we're going to give each of you an opportunity, 1 minute, to share your closing statement. And the order will be Gary, Vicky, Heidi, and Kai. And then we'll end with some closing announcements.
Thank you. And thank you, all of you in attendance today. You are very thoughtful in your way of being, so thank you very much. I think what we've discussed today is exceedingly important for our state. The hope that we have for our citizens to come out of the system and back into life. Families restored. Fathers staying at home, mentoring their sons and their daughters. Whole families. Our culture must be one that holds up the family and responsible decisions. Government should assist that, but it should not lead the way. It should lead the way in saying, this is the way that can be done. I can tell you as governor, what I long for is to provide a platform for the people to live in freedom and in liberty, to exercise their own self-liberty, that we would have a smaller government and a larger citizen, people taking responsibility for their lives. This is a cultural shift that has happened, that brought us to this place, and a cultural shift can take it from this place to a place of wholeness. I believe this is what we long for. We long for a society who understands what right and responsible government is, that the people will live in prosperity. Thank you.
You know, like so many issues facing our state, we have talked a lot about this problem for many, many years. And I think it's time that we put into action a concrete plan to address recidivism, to address our those who are incarcerated and away from their families here. We need to engage with the community, the nonprofit organizations, the legislature. It's a leader who can bring all the people together to have these difficult conversations so that we can move forward. And it's so important that we talk about transparency so we all know what's going on, not just hear about it through the media. Accountability, because we all have a role to play, and moving with a sense of urgency. That's what we need, because their lives are at risk. And every day that we don't address this, it makes the problem so much more difficult. And it's not just them, but it's their families and our community and all of us that are impacted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers, and thank you to everyone who's here today to listen to each of us and to hear what we are about and what we hope our hopes are for everyone moving forward. I believe that right now we're at a critical place for our people, our land, and for our future. These are critical times for many, many reasons. We've been through some very hard challenges that we have to figure our way through, where there's issues that are going to come up with our land leases. Many of our 65-year land leases are coming up. The next governor is going to decide what happens to our land. What's happening with our land cannot be a matter of history. It has to be a matter of what's happening presently, because when we do what's right by our land, we can do what's right by our people. Having served on the City Council, I have the experience that's needed legislatively and with it, working with administration to move forward starting day one. And with my background in mental health and working in the many areas that I've worked with, I have a heart for the people that will keep me working very hard every day after I get into office. It's going to be about all of us coming together. This is our time. We literally cannot afford to wait any longer. It cannot be about politics. It has to be about the people. And I long to serve as your next governor for this great state of Hawaii. Thank you so much.
Thanks for everyone coming today, and for all of us that came here on a Sunday. I think it really shows how important this issue is here in Hawaii. You know, I talked about my background growing up as a kid in Hilo, the juvenile delinquent I was. I was one mistake away from going into this system that we just talked about for 90 minutes. One mistake away. The fact that I'm sitting here right now as a Native Hawaiian, 30 years later, a sitting United States member of the U.S. House of Representatives and a candidate for governor is unreal. It's unreal. And that's what I bring to the office of the governor. Somebody that has walked in multiple different worlds, worn different hats, brings different pilina and kuleana and life experiences to bring people hope for those 26% Native Hawaiians in our DOE public school system so that they can look up and see, hey, get a Native Hawaiian up there as governor of Kia'aina of Hawaii. And so that's what I bring to this race. Mahalo for having me, and aloha. Knowing you Native Hawaiian too. So.
Before our candidate forum closes, we would like to share some important announcements. Please be sure to vote in the primary election, which is on Saturday, August 13th. Remember that Hawaii now has automatic voter registration, and voters will receive their ballots in the mail for primary election by July 26, 2022. You can also register to vote online. For more information on this, please go to elections.hawaii.gov. As a reminder to folks watching, people with felony convictions can still vote once they're out of prison and jail, even if you are under probation or parole supervision. People in jail, pre-trial, or convicted of misdemeanor offenses are not barred from voting, but must vote by absentee ballot. If you want to stay updated on the ACLU of Hawaiʻi and ʻEkolu Mea Nui, please visit our websites, www.acluhawaii.org and www.ʻekolumeanui.org. At a later date, we will be post a recording of this candidate forum on the ACLU of Hawaiʻi website.
Our hope is that this candidate forum leaves us better informed with a greater understanding of what is at stake and what we want from the next governor to build safe, healthy, thriving, and just communities. In Hawaii, 3 in 4 arrests are for nonviolent, non-property offenses. Most arrests are for crimes of poverty and houselessness, for substance use and mental health issues, things the criminal legal system handles poorly. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can elect leaders who are committed to working with community, emphasis on unity in community, to reduce our reliance on incarceration and invest the cost savings in education, job training, stable housing, mental health and substance use services, resources for survivors of harm and crime, and restorative justice practices. We can invest in growing our own food and neighborhood revitalization projects that support small businesses and improve the quality of life for all of us. The fierce urgency of now is here. It's time for hulihia. Mahalo nui to the candidates and to their families who support them on the campaign trail. We really applaud you for doing so. We want to mahalo Olelo, our partners and sponsors, and to our beloved community throughout Hawaii who are listening in. Mahalo nui loa, malama pono, and a hui ho.